Grace and Peace. I'm Brian Musser, the Baptist Campus Minister at Drexel University, and this is Peace and Power Christian Fellowship, the peace of Jesus Christ to change our lives, and the power of the Holy Spirit to change our world. We are beginning a brand new series for the summer term 2024, and it is called Obedience in the Presence of God, a study in the Old Testament law. And this is the second part of the first lesson. We're going to look at the divide that we kind of feel like exists in our world between the sacred and the secular, and see how that is actually a very, very different worldview than what exists in ancient Israel with the ancient Israelites, and does not really make sense as we read through the Torah and read through the law. To illustrate this point, let's just look at Deuteronomy in outline form, Deuteronomy chapters 23 through 26. And I'm just going to bring up all the different topics covered in those four chapters. So it starts with this idea of who is excluded from worship, what nationalities of people are excluded from worship. And then we see this verse about an unclean camp and what it's like to have God's presence in an unclean camp. We look at slaves and refugees and how to protect slaves that have run away. Do you send them back or not? Some laws about prostitution or laws against prostitution. Then we have a financial law about charging interest. How to make vows to God. What you do when you're wandering through your neighbor's field. Can you pick their crops or not? How much can you pick? Can you pick enough or do you have to leave it alone entirely? Then we look at chapter 24, laws about divorce and remarriage, a marriage exemption from military service. If you're in the first year of your marriage, you're exempt from military service. We got what to do with millstones or boundary markers and how actually moving them is so terrible. Then we have a law about kidnapping, skin diseases, leprosy quite often, or other types of skin diseases. Then we're back to financial stuff, what to do with collateral loans and how to fairly pay those who work for you. Then a very important law about parents and children and how they don't share guilt. If a parent sins, the children are not guilty. If the children sin, the parents are not guilty. However, the sin will influence each other. Then justice for the vulnerable, the widows, the orphans, the poor, the foreigner. Leavings. Basically, when you harvest the field, don't go back over and pick it over again. Limits to punishment. What is a just punishment? What is taking it too far? And then some random verses that actually show a random verse that actually shows up and is used in a very interesting way in the New Testament. When an ox is treading, you don't muzzle it so that it can eat as it is working. Levirate marriage, what to do when a brother dies and the brother-in-law remarries the wife of the deceased brother. Laws about women's hand placement if they get involved in a fight between two men and what happens if certain things are touched. Having honest weights and measures. Destroying the Amalekites. First fruit offerings, how to give an offering and tithes, things like that. And then this section ends with an overarching call to obedience. That's 4 chapters. You go from everything about worship to money to fighting to justice to how to harvest things. In our minds, it looks like we're bouncing from one idea to another. We're looking as if we are jumping back and forth from what's sacred, what's secular. These ideas, it's almost like the writer of, to our perspective, the writer of the Torah might have a little bit of an attention deficit disorder with how many topics come up in these 4 chapters. But I want us to really, really grasp this. Ancient Israelites did not make a distinction between sacred and secular. Their world was not divided into two categories. There were no categories. Every aspect of their life was sacred. God is involved in how they handled their harvesting and how they handled their money, as God was involved in who could be in the worship space or not. God was in every part of their life because every part of their life was seen as a blessing from the divine. Life was extremely fragile, and everything you did every day was a gift from God. And so these laws that seem to us to be about business, or laws about just other sorts of things, were sacred laws in the mindset of an Israelite because they didn't really have a secular category. They didn't think God was absent from any part of their life. So understanding or figuring out what God wanted them to do in each of these areas was an important part of how they looked at things. And the Torah is written in such a way to reinforce this unity. Their entire lives were a unified whole, and the Torah is written so that this unity is something that is understood. What we see as confusing was seen by the original audience as completely normal. They didn't have two categories. They just had life. And honestly, as we look at things, I think this is a much healthier way to view the world around us, the way to view our lives. I think the modern era followers of Jesus, the church, Christians, fall into trouble when we try to say there are parts of this world that are sacred and parts of this world that God is not interested in. That causes problems in our lives and in our hearts. So this overarching idea from the Torah that God is involved in every aspect of life can be extremely useful for us as we live our lives. Some thoughts and ideas and questions to looking at the outline of Deuteronomy 23 through 26. Are there any topics that surprise you that God chose to include? And the second question, are there ways that you struggle with the concept that every part of life is sacred? I would love to hear your opinions on those two questions. Drop down in the comment section if you want. Share with me what you're thinking. But one of the main ideas of the Torah law, the law that we find in Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, is this idea that God is intimately involved in every aspect of our lives. And the ancient Israelites lived that way, and we should as well. As always, there are 3 ways to join this conversation: in person Sunday nights at 5 p.m. in the JEMIC, and then live via Zoom on Monday night at 7 p.m. These weekly wrap-ups on YouTube and or WordPress. And I'm all over the social media: Instagram, TikTok, Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, WordPress, YouTube. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and follow as appropriate on those social media outlets. I enjoyed having this conversation with you. Hopefully it continues real soon.